Edward Snowden wants to come home. The ostracized whistleblower has been pecking out his memoir in Russian exile, but apparently prefers the bosom of life in an American prison to wasting away in that borscht-soaked hellhole. Snowden knows he broke the law when he downloaded 1.5 million documents as an NSA contractor that he funneled to a pair of Western journalists. But he also knew the U.S. government was warrantlessly spying on Americans with a series of secret programs and blatantly lying about it. Looking at you, James Clapper. From hoovering metadata to tapping internet cables and switches, NSA programs like PRISM and X-Keyscore were breaking and entering, spying then lying, making Snowden's crimes minuscule by comparison. Flagrant unconstitutional violations could no longer be met with "we're protecting you from bad guys" propaganda, and Snowden's bell could not be unrung. We have entered into 6 years of ongoing discussions about mass surveillance and the role and scope of government, and from the USA Freedom Act that supposedly curtailed metadata collection to the 2016 campaign spying from the FBI to the DOJ, it's clear we've needed these changes that would be impossible without the Snowden revelations. Edward Snowden wants a fair and open trial, but will be prosecuted opaquely under the Espionage Act. The tone has already been set by the Secretary of State and the President, who have in the past respectively called for his death sentence and execution. We can debate whether or not Edward Snowden is a traitor, but what's plainly settled is our shrouded government agencies abused power and illegally exploited individuals and corporations to our detriment. Privacy tools have exploded as a result of this shift, yet there is still an unhealthy abuse of power that is an ongoing magnet for corruption. Let a jury of Snowden's peers decide his fate. And maybe when they publicly sift through more of these revelations, Snowden will be joined in jail by deep state power hoarders who are all too eager to make and exploit loopholes that strengthen their grasp by making all of us more vulnerable. And that's the memo. Edward Snowden admitted to CBS this week that, quote, "It's not hard to make the argument that I broke the law." But should he really languish in an American prison, or even worse, Moscow forever? The party panel is back. Jessica Tarlov, Jason Meister, and Peter Suderman. Jason, I will start with you. Is Edward Snowden a traitor?
He is a traitor, and he did break the law. But I think that a lot of the things that you said in that monologue are true. I think that there's public benefit to what he has done. If there wasn't so much unbelievable corruption within the CIA and the NSA, then there would be no role for him to leak anything. So I think that there's benefits that we get from it. The problem is that under the Espionage Act, that there really is no jury to hear why the motivation for the leak happened.
Yes.
So there's no allowance for that, because you break the law in this country, and that's what happens with regard to the Espionage Act.
Yes. However, he is asking for basic due process. Is that too much to ask?
Absolutely not. I think everyone is due their due process. But as we were talking about in the break, I remain extremely conflicted about Edward Snowden. So I do think, obviously, that systemic government overreach is a problem. Illegal collection of data, which we know is going on, infringing upon our Fourth Amendment rights constantly. Right now, I'm sure that it's watching, though I can't see the camera, which is ours. But at the same time, the release of some of that information, which does have national security implications, is deeply concerning to me. But a fair trial for everybody, I just don't believe that he can get one.
Yes.
And so I might prefer to stay in Moscow.
I would like to hear what he has to say. And, you know, Snowden claims, no, I didn't put lives at risk. And if I did, show me the proof. Because I think if there were proof of that, which is what Secretary of State Mike Pompeo claimed in 2016 when he called for Edward Snowden's death sentence, they would have made that very public.
Snowden's critics have frequently overstated their case, or at least not backed it up. And I think history is going to judge Snowden, maybe not totally positively, but kindly in many ways, because fundamentally he was right about the ways that big tech and big government have gotten together, worked together to surveil our lives, to try and put take power away from us as individuals and give that power to big corporations and to big government. And, you know, he's not in prison right now, but he's paying a price. He is living in exile. He is away from his family, his friends, from the life he knew. And that is not nothing. And it is something that he chose and kind of knew that was coming. And so, you know, even if it's not quite honorable, it is a thing that you have to respect a little bit.
Yes. And, you know, he knew what the government was doing. The incredible thing to me is the NSA, with all of these tools, didn't realize that one of their contractors was taking all of these documents.
Right.
Seems like some pretty piss-poor cybersecurity.
It's pretty bad. But I think what this comes down to is there's a difference between right versus wrong and lawful versus unlawful. And it's sort of, these are
What
all...
if he tried? What if he tried to go the legal route?
If he tried to go the legal route to get all this exposed, I don't think he would have been as effective. So I don't think it really, it's almost like a hypothetical.
I think it would have been shut down completely.
He was shut down. Yeah. Yes.
Right.
And you know, you have reported about Bill Binney, who was a similar whistleblower who was pulled out of the shower at gunpoint by the FBI after he made revelations very similar to this.
The government doesn't like whistleblowers, and it's going to take every action they can, make every effort to try and shut these guys down. And what the Snowden case shows more than anything else is that a committed whistleblower who has the public interest in mind can make a difference. Perhaps at great personal cost.
People were very mad at him. Conservatives were very mad at him. But it is because of his work that we have been able to pull back some of the layers and see what the FBI was doing in particular.
There's no question. This transcends all political parties. I mean, this is about the public.
And to Jessica's point, there are a lot of people, Democrat, Republican, Independent, Libertarian, well, not as many Libertarians, who are conflicted.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just at a political rally for Elizabeth Warren, actually hearing what she had to say, and legislation to protect whistleblowers was one of the things on her list. I mean, it is a top priority for the Democratic candidates.
Wait till someone blows the whistle on her campaign. She's no Marianne Williamson.
And no Pete Buttigieg.
Well said. All right, you guys, thank you so much. Great talking to you, Peter, Jason, and Jesse.